When George and Kathy Lutz said to Jay Anson in those tapes that the door exploded before their very eyes, Jay Anson didn't explain how it happened. It's a telepathic illusion. There was no physical door exploded. In other words, you and I could be in a room together. You see a ghost, I don't see it. That's because the ghost has projected its image to you, not me. That's what George and Kathy would see many times, and that's how ghosts are seen, telepathically.
But do the factual errors and dramatic embellishments found in Jay Anson's book prove that the Lutzes conspired to create a hoax?
When you change a Chevy Vega to a tan Ford because it doesn't fit your profile of what happened to the priest, that's an out-and-out deception. I don't think anything can be 100% accurate, but when you read something as nonfiction, I think the public has a right to demand that the large majority of what's in there is the truth.
Attorney William Weber contends that the Lutzes had always planned to cash in on the DeFeo murder tragedy, starting from the time they decided to buy the house.
The Lutzes' game plan was to make a commercial venture of their living in the DeFeo residence. There's no question in my mind that that was their aim and their goal.
Why would Weber accuse us of concocting a hoax with him and then make us swear in a contract that he wanted us to sign that we would absolutely tell the truth and agree to take polygraph tests?
William Weber at no time intimated that the Amityville case was a hoax. He was not committed to parapsychology, but he told me more than once that he was fully convinced that the possession theory was the most likely. If he has said that he thought it was a fraud, well, he has his reasons for it. I don't know what they are, but it's not true.
Let's pursue the theory that, in fact, the Lutzes had this grand master scheme, that they were going to come in, create a haunted house story. First of all, they left their whole investment, their life savings, was wrapped up in this house. There have been lots of haunted house stories throughout the ages, but you don't know which ones are going to take off and capture the public's imagination. The odds would be against them making a lot of money off of a haunted house.
The thing is this, that if you're going to create a hoax, you're going to make sure that you get your share of the money. Now remember that George and Kathy made some money, but they didn't make the money that the producers and Jay Anson made. They became wealthy. George and Kathy never did.
But how much did the Lutzes profit from the Amityville horror?
I think we probably made a little over $250,000 from the original book. Somewhere around $160,000 from the movie, total to date. More than 1/3 of that went to lawyers easily, or not so easily, defending lawsuits.
One of the first lawsuits brought against the Lutzes is the one filed by Jim and Barbara Cromartie, who buy the Ocean Avenue house in the spring of 1977. The Cromarties, who see no evidence that the house is haunted, soon find their own lives turned upside down, not by demons or evil spirits, but by the hundreds of tourists and would-be ghost hunters who besiege their home. Claiming that the Amityville horror is directly responsible for their plight, the Cromarties sue Jay Anson, publisher Prentice Hall, and the Lutzes for invasion of privacy.
The real horror of that house was, number one, the horrible murders that took place, and number two, the subsequent harassment of all the owners that tried to live there and live a normal life.
Although the Cromarties eventually settled their lawsuit for an undisclosed sum, the constant harassment by the media and the public forces them to move out of the house after only 2 years.
Let me ask you a question. 6 people were murdered in that house. 5 people were driven out of there 28 days after they lived there. Would you live in that house?
After the phenomenal success of Jay Anson's novel, which goes through 13 printings and sells more than 10 million copies, the motion picture version of the Amityville horror is released by American International Pictures on July 27, 1979. Starring James Brolin and Margot Kidder and boasting an eye-catching ad campaign, the film goes on to become one of the biggest blockbusters of the summer, taking in nearly $80 million at the box office. Days before the movie's release, however, attorney William Weber tells the Associated Press that he participated in the creation of the story and that he is now suing George and Kathy Lutz for stealing the ideas he had suggested to them as part of his own never-realized book project in 1976.
When I first met with the Lutzes, we spent literally, I would say, 5 or 6 hours over several bottles of wine that they graciously produced. And that's when talk as to the slime on the doors and the toilets and around windowsills took place. I had suggested certain phenomena could be interpreted as supernatural phenomena. But I knew all along that it was just a commercial venture and it was a fabricated part, and it wasn't true.
Mr. Weber is very inaccurate to say that he provided us with any materials that ended up in the Amityville Horror. The real problem with answering Mr. Weber is that he can pretty much say what he wants, and I don't feel like going back to court to fight him again.
It's unfortunate that some people just seem to go a little nuts when all of this came about.
In June of 1979, American International Pictures asks George and Kathy Lutz to submit to polygraph tests, during which they answer questions about their experiences in Amityville. They both pass.
The polygraph tests that the Lutzes took were conducted by the Star tabloid. I really don't give much credence to that. They only wanted to be tested by certain experts in quotes, hired by the Star, who was then paying them for writing a story about them.
Does this woman actually believe what she's saying when she says these things? The Star had absolutely nothing to do with that test. When American International Pictures said they would pay for the tests, we said we would like them to be with the most qualified people that they can find. They picked Chris Gugas and Michael Rice, who were considered at that time, I think, number 3 in the country for conducting the test.
In September of 1979, Reverend Ralph J. Pecoraro, the Catholic priest who blessed the Amityville house, is ordered to testify in federal court in the $2 million countersuit filed against the Lutzes by attorney William Weber. Father Pecoraro swears under oath that he did, in fact, hear a disembodied voice in the house tell him to get out. But he can neither confirm nor deny that the resulting terrors portrayed in the book or the film ever actually happened. Yet even as an out-of-court settlement is reached in the case, reports of strange phenomena continue to surround those involved in the Amityville Horror.
After I had finished the manuscript, I had turned it over to my editor to take back to Prentice Hall in New Jersey. His car caught on fire. An accident. I gave a copy of the manuscript to another friend, and there was a rainstorm, and he went through what he thought was a puddle. It turned out to be a pothole. His whole car sank. It was a total wreck. The only thing that was dry in the whole car was the manuscript. The 2 incidents that took place after that kind of shake me a little bit, because I had given the first 2 chapters to a friend of mine, a woman named Frances Evans. And she took it home, and she died in a fire that night. She and 2 daughters were killed.
Unfortunately, author Jay Anson does not get to enjoy the success of the Amityville Horror for very long. He dies of a heart attack in March 1980 at the age of 59, shortly after completing his second novel titled 666, a reference to the biblical number for Satan.